Hey friend, if you've had a long day, this story might be just what you need. Give it a few minutes, it might change the way your day ends. It was one of those late spring afternoons when the sky can't quite decide between sun and rain. The clouds had gathered without warning, and within minutes, a soft drizzle fell over the quiet streets of the small town. Mark sat behind the wheel of his city bus, tapping gently on the steering wheel as he waited at a red light. He had just a few more stops to go before the end of his shift. Tired, a bit grumpy, and hungry. He wasn't in the mood for anything out of the ordinary. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman stood by the bus shelter holding a thin plastic grocery bag that looked dangerously close to tearing. Her coat was soaked through, and the small umbrella in her hand had turned itself inside out against the breeze. She wasn't at a designated stop, just standing there, alone. Mark hesitated. He wasn't supposed to stop outside of scheduled points, but something in her posture, something about how small she looked in that big gray afternoon, tugged at him. He pulled over. The doors hissed open. "Need a ride somewhere, ma'am?" he asked. The woman looked up, surprised, but then smiled softly. "I was hoping someone kind would stop." She climbed on slowly, her knees stiff, her hands trembling just slightly as she found a seat near the front. Mark waited until she settled before pulling back onto the road. They didn't speak much, but Mark kept glancing at her in the mirror, noticing her gentle smile as she looked out the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. After a few minutes, she spoke. "My husband used to drive this route many years ago," she said almost to herself. "He'd always tell me stories about the people he met, said driving a bus was the best way to learn about humanity." Mark didn't know what to say, but he smiled. "Sounds like a good man." "He was," she replied. "He passed 5 years ago. I still take this route sometimes, just to feel close." The words sat heavy in the warm air of the bus. The rain outside tapped rhythmically against the windows. When they arrived at her stop, one Mark knew well, on the quieter side of town, he offered to walk her with his umbrella. "No need," she said, stepping down slowly. "You already made my day." She took a few careful steps through the puddles, then paused, turned back, and waved. "Thank you for noticing," she said simply. Mark sat for a moment longer, watching her fade into the soft rain. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but something about it made him feel lighter. That night, he didn't feel so tired. The next morning, Mark came to work early. He had stopped by a flower shop on his way and asked the owner to deliver a small bouquet to a woman on Oak Street, with a note that simply read, "Someone remembered, and someone still cares." Because kindness doesn't need grand gestures. Sometimes it's just pulling over in the rain. Edvard sat on the park bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the shoes he couldn't afford to replace. The park was quiet that morning. Only a few joggers passed by, and the trees rustled with early autumn wind. His breath formed small clouds in the crisp air, but inside he felt nothing. Or maybe too much. He couldn't tell anymore. Just last month, he had a job, a fiancé, and an apartment they were going to move into. Now, he had none of it. She left. The company downsized. His savings vanished faster than he expected. His phone buzzed occasionally, family checking in, but he was too ashamed to answer. What would he say? That everything he worked for had slipped through his fingers? He stared ahead, expression blank, as a little boy passed with his mother. The boy was holding a balloon and singing quietly to himself. Edvard closed his eyes. What's the point? Why try again when life keeps knocking you over? Then he heard it, a voice beside him. "You look like you've been talking to ghosts," said an old man sitting down beside him, gently holding a paper bag of birdseed. Edvard gave a half-hearted chuckle. "You're not too far off." The man smiled, his beard snowy and eyes kind. He tossed some seeds toward the pigeons gathering near their feet. "Lost something important?" Edvard hesitated. "Everything." The man nodded, as if he'd heard that answer before. Life has a way of testing the strength we didn't know we had. Edvard sighed. I used to think positive thinking was real. Now, I don't even know who I am. The man didn't rush to answer. Instead, he said quietly, I lost my wife 8 years ago. Cancer. The day after the funeral, I sat on this exact bench for hours, wondering how I'd live without her. Edvard looked at him. And now? The man shrugged, smiling sadly. Now I feed the birds, I read her letters, and every morning I find one small thing to be grateful for. A warm scarf, the sound of leaves, a stranger who says hello. He paused. Gratitude doesn't fix everything, son, but it keeps the light on inside while you rebuild. Edvard was silent. Then, almost without realizing, he asked, How do you stop the fear? The man tossed more seed. You don't. You just stop letting it speak louder than your hope. Something about those words sank deep. Edvard looked down again, at his worn shoes, his chipped fingernails, his bruised pride, and then slowly up at the sky, where the balloon the little boy held was now floating freely, dancing in the wind. Maybe it was okay to let go. Of the story he thought he had to live, of the timeline that betrayed him, of the idea that failure meant the end. He pulled out his phone, the screen lit up with messages he'd ignored. One from his sister, I made soup, come over. Another from his former coworker, they're hiring where I am, you should apply. Edvard smiled, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was real. He turned to the old man to thank him. But the bench beside him was empty. Only the pigeons remained, pecking peacefully at the crumbs. Edvard stood up, his body heavy but his chest a little lighter. As he walked away, he whispered to himself, one small thing to be grateful for, and then another, and another. Because maybe staying positive isn't about pretending life isn't hard. Maybe it's about believing, despite everything, that the pain you feel today won't last forever, that broken isn't the end, that you still have time to write a better story. She treated him like someone who could get there, if he worked hard enough. Her feedback was blunt but never cruel. She taught him how to read his opponent, how to control tempo, how to think 2 shots ahead. More importantly, she taught him how to believe in himself when no one else seemed to. One afternoon, as they packed up, Marcus finally asked, Why are you helping me? Julia looked up from her bag. Because once, someone did the same for me. I was a mess, angry, insecure, ready to give up on everything. But someone saw something in me I didn't see in myself. He changed the course of my life with a few afternoons on a court like this. She paused. Maybe it's my turn now. The day of tryouts came again. Marcus stood outside the gym, his palms sweaty despite the cold breeze. Other players were stretching, joking, radiating confidence. Marcus felt the old fear creep in, but beneath it was something steadier. The muscle memory of hundreds of corrected serves, the voice of someone who believed in him. When his name was called, he stepped onto the court and played the best tennis of his life. His serves were solid, his backhand sharp, and his footwork crisp. He didn't overthink, he just moved, breathed, and played. Later, as he sat on the bench catching his breath, the coach approached him. You've improved, the coach said. Really improved. Marcus only nodded, trying to hide the grin that spread across his face. That evening, he returned to the park. Julia was there as usual, book in hand. I made the team, he said quietly. She looked up and smiled, not surprised but proud. I knew you would. Marcus sat beside her. For a few moments, they didn't speak. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the cracked court. Thank you, he said finally, for not giving up on me. Julia closed her book and looked at him. Just remember, someday you'll see someone standing where you once stood. Don't walk past them. Marcus nodded. I won't. He meant it. Because sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't come with applause or big promises. Sometimes they come quietly, from a bench on the sidelines, and remind you who you were always meant to become. It was a lazy Sunday morning when Leo wandered into the flea market. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and old books. Tables brimmed with forgotten treasures, vinyl records, worn postcards, and dusty toys from another era. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just liked the feeling of history clinging to old things. That's when he saw it. A vintage camera sat alone on the edge of a vendor's table, its leather case cracked but dignified, like a proud elder. Leo picked it up carefully. It was heavier than he expected, solid and cool in his hands. $10, the vendor said. It still clicks, but I don't know if it works. Leo turned the winding lever. It moved with a soft resistance. He pressed the shutter. It snapped like a secret being kept. A small red number showed through the window, 27. There was film inside. Back home, Leo sat at his kitchen table, turning the camera over in his hands. Who had used it last? What did they see through its lens? He couldn't shake the feeling that the camera had one more story to tell. He found a local photo lab that still developed film. A week later, a small envelope arrived with 27 printed photos. Leo opened it like a time capsule. The photos were quiet, soft in tone, nothing dramatic. A young couple on a picnic blanket. A woman with freckles laughing near a fountain. A man tying his daughter's shoes in a park. A blurry dog chasing a red ball. And the last photo, a handwritten sign taped to a tree. If you find this camera, I hope you find joy in these little moments we loved. Leo stared at that last picture for a long time. The photos weren't masterpieces, but there was something sincere about them. Honest, unposed. They looked like love, and it moved him more than he expected. Leo wasn't a photographer, but those pictures stayed with him. He pinned them above his desk. Every day he looked at them before work. The girl's laugh, the dog's leap, the man's quiet care. A month later, he went back to the flea market. He asked the vendor if he remembered where the camera came from. The man shrugged. Stuff just shows up. Could have been from a house clearance. Leo left his number anyway, in case you get anything like that again. Weeks passed. Then one evening his phone rang. "Hey," the vendor said, "I found a box of old negatives and letters. Might be related to that camera." Leo rushed over. The box was a treasure chest of memories. More photos, this time in black and white. Some letters, a few postcards, and a journal. It belonged to a woman named Nora. From what Leo could piece together, she had used the camera throughout her life. The letters were to a man named Elliot, who had died young, but the journal continued long after. Nora wrote to him for decades, as if he were still reading. She had never remarried, but she had lived a full life, gardening, teaching art, traveling, and photographing everything. Leo felt like he had stepped into someone's heart. The last journal entry was dated 2 years ago. "I still carry the camera sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe to keep you near, or maybe to share the things I still find beautiful." Leo closed the book gently. He didn't know Nora, but somehow, through her photos and words, he did. He saw her joy, her grief, her wonder, and it changed something in him. That weekend, Leo bought a roll of film. He began taking pictures, his morning coffee steaming by the window, kids playing near the corner store, a stray cat basking on a wall. Nothing extraordinary, just moments. He started a blog and shared Nora's story, how a forgotten camera found its way to a stranger and reminded him that life was full of little wonders if you just remembered to look. The post went viral. People began writing to Leo, sharing stories of their loved ones, their memories, their own forgotten treasures. Someone even recognized Nora from an old photography group. She had passed away peacefully, they said, but would have loved knowing her pictures were still speaking. Leo kept the camera, but he never took the last photo. He liked the idea that it still held one more memory, waiting to be made.